pretty much.
So what kind of research are you doing at that point? Or did you go out and find a mausoleum to spend the night in? Or were you talking with people? What kind of research did you do to get up and running?
I have to admit, a lot of my research was over the internet. I did live in the Philippines, like I said, starting from 1977. I was 12 at the time when I moved there. My dad was in the United States Navy, so we lived here in the States. We went back and forth between the Philippines and the United States. My dad retired from the Navy, and he decided that me and my brother and my sister needed to live in the Philippines for a while to get to, we had lots of relatives there. So he wanted us to get to know our grandparents and all our family there and to kind of understand our culture. And I'm glad he did. So I spent high school and college there. And so a lot of my visual research was on the internet. There were articles, interviews made with people who lived there. So there was a lot of that. I used a lot of that. And of course, my own memories of what it's like to be in, to go to those cemeteries, just to visit them. Also, with regards to poverty, I wouldn't say I wasn't wealthy. My family was not wealthy. My family was solidly middle class in the Philippines, and I actually had, I have relatives who are poor. So getting to and like I said, I have a huge family. So variety of economic standing. And so I get to visit their homes. I get to see what it's like for them, to live without running water, to not have, a bathroom, basically, and to just live without the normal conveniences. You and I here in the States is very, very different. The way people live over there, it's super different. So I culled a lot from my own memories for this book. And the rest was internet research. Thank goodness for the internet.
Let me ask you this: how does growing up in two distinctly different cultures like that, how does that inform your view of the world, especially when you're doing that at such a young age and impressionable? And then how does that inform your writing?
Well, I think, living in two different places, and living, how do you say it? Because when I was a child growing up here, we had television, we had telephones. My dad had a car, and we went to the grocery store, went shopping, went to the toy store, that kind of thing. Went to McDonald's and Burger King, rode the yellow buses to school. When I moved to the Philippines, it was very different. We lived in my grandfather's house, and we sacrifice. I mean, you really sacrifice it. Your lifestyle changes. So I guess, in a sense, I just simply learned a lot how different people live. That it isn't all just one neat little, way of living. In the Philippines, I had to walk to a lot of different places. We used public transportation. My dad didn't buy a car until I was in college. And at that, he didn't even drive it a lot, because gas is expensive. And because public transportation is so easy to find, basically what we did was we walked to the corner of our street and we waited for jeepneys. Have you ever seen a jeepney? This is our form of transportation. We have buses, jeepneys, and what we call tricycles, which is a motorcycle with a cab. And you could hire one of those. You could flag one of those down like a taxi in a way.
I've seen one, but only because I looked one up as I was reading your book.
So you could flag those down, and you just tell them where you want to go, and they take you right to the door. Versus jeepneys, they run a particular route like a bus. The difference is it looks like one of those renegade Jeeps, but they're extended. So it can seat maybe 20 people, sometimes 15 to 20 people. So yeah, I guess it informed it growing up like that, experiencing all those things, just broadened my view, I think, of how people live, and respecting that, respecting that the struggles that people have when they don't have all the conveniences available to them, how they can make do, and how, I mean, they could definitely wish for things to be better. Who doesn't, right? But they make do. And I think that that's the core of, I think, how I view the world. That I find it interesting. I find it interesting how people, different ways people learn how to cope with whatever's available to them, and the life that they live. So I think for me, it just makes me interested in many other cultures. Seeing my own culture and how people live there, being very American, and living here and the lifestyle here. And makes me curious for how other people live in other countries. And in terms of how it informs my writing, for this particular book, it certainly helped me, my experiences living over there. But it also, I think, helps me want to branch out. And I remember when I said earlier that setting inspires me.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, sometimes, I love watching like National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and I've always had an interest in anthropology. And so I love looking at the different, cultures of the world, and studying their society, and studying how the family dynamics work. And so that, in turn, as far as how it informs my writing, it basically just inspires me to look deeper into how different it could be, because even within, let's say, an American society, you have many people of many different backgrounds, right? And that the family dynamics could be very different from one family to another. It may not be. So,
and even within people who have an otherwise very similar background.
Yeah, very similar, but they could live in exactly the same town, but the family dynamics, depending on, how, who their ancestors were, or, where they came from, if they weren't born in that city, right, could inform how they live. So, yeah, essentially, I think, my experiences living in two different countries helps me broaden my understanding of how people live, and made me curious about, other, how people live. Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely makes sense to me. Once in a while, when I get to feel a little bit bummed out about life in the old U.S. of A., doesn't happen very often. I'm very grateful for all the wonderful things I have. In fact, those of you watching on YouTube, just behold the amazing Batman figures. What a time to be alive. But I will read history. I'll read about folks in other countries. I will seek out books, and that never fails to make me far more grateful for what I have. I did a whole section on Roman history and the Colosseum, and I found out that they were doing executions. If you wanted to be an executioner, you'd work your way up by doing kind of like amateur hour or open mic night, but for executions outside the Colosseum. And so you'd have somebody out there taking requests for the people, the passers-by, on their way to the main show while they're executing some poor slob. And I read that, I was like, you know what? America's not that bad. We're doing okay. We're missing that today.
That's true, and it's so funny. America is wonderful in a sense where what I find fascinating is, when you look at it and you look at all the different accents and all the different regions, there's a reason why people have these different accents. It's because of the immigrant population that a couple hundred years ago, the people that came to live there, whether they're from Ireland or from Denmark or wherever, and they settled in those particular states. I find that so fascinating.
I know you can see that even right here in Indiana, where we're flat and boring and have a lot of corn. Also, the third largest tech sector in the country, but a lot of corn. And you can go from one town to another, and you can very much still see the distinct differences in those towns, depending on what the background was of the people that that founded the town originally.
Yes. So interesting.